Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coins, RPGs, and More. This is John. Today, I have a recommendation for you, and it's a little slight departure from what I've been doing so far in the sense that it's not connected to the Prince Valiant system. So this is a break from that series for a moment, but it's a special day because not only... okay, let's start from the beginning. I backed a Kickstarter a while ago that I thought was really interesting. And it was another retro clone of Dungeons and Dragons. Excuse me. That had a slightly different take, and I thought had great potential. So I backed it. And it turns out that the creator of that Kickstarter was very receptive to feedback, especially feedback as it came to those of us who have visual impairments and concerns with being able to read documents, whether they're PDF or print. And so I became really even more interested when I got that, because I saw the previews of what he was doing, and it was pretty cool. And he was receptive to some suggestions for changes to make it even more readable for those of us with visual impairments, and he actually made the changes, which was amazing to me because I did not actually expect that to happen. I thought I would make a suggestion and maybe we might be able to get a slight change somewhere, but he actually changed the whole thing. So kudos to this guy. Now that I've said that, this recommendation, this is not a review. I'm not pretending to be objective here. This is my recommendation based on something that I have purchased, based on something that I already like, because I think it's a useful game. I think it's a useful tool. So, what we're talking about today is Chromatic Dungeons, Old School Fantasy Role-Playing Rules. Now, this is published by Ice Grim Creations. I think I pronounced that correctly. And the author is Roderick Walbell. I believe I pronounced that correct. Roderick Walbell. If I've pronounced your name wrong, I apologize. Please let me know in the comments or on Facebook, and I will do my best to correct my mistake for future. So, what is Chromatic Dungeons? That can be best explained in reading the dedication in this book, which I will do. I would like to dedicate this book to those who pioneered this great hobby that millions of us enjoy. Not only Gary and Dave, but to Janelle and Bob and David, and so many more whose creations sparked my imagination and helped shape me into who I am. And I'd like to dedicate this to all of those who have faced adversity and exclusion of all of their lives, but bring the benefits of diversity and different outlooks and viewpoints to our hobby. All of you have helped open my eyes and be a better person for knowing you. I have learned so much over the years and continue to learn and be a better human being for it. And our hobby is better with you in it. Thank you. Chromatic Dungeons is, at its heart, a retro clone of D&D. The lens that it uses is that of honest inclusion of all types of people who take part in our hobby. It takes pains to show through the art that the people who take part in this hobby are a diverse bunch. And it's not just one particular group or demographic who's being catered to. The book does its best to cater to all demographics, all types of people that it can. And it does so with great heart, with great love for what the original Dungeons and Dragons was and what it can be. This is not a rehash to relive the glory days, as much as I have enjoyed those versions of the games and continue to do so. This is an idea of taking those older rules and pushing things a little more forward, pushing the idea of diversity and inclusivity a little more to the forefront of this hobby. And that goes for whether it's your ethnic background or your sexual orientation, if you'll forgive me for mentioning something so personal, as well as your outlook on culture and society. It does its best to do away with a couple of, shall we say, sacred cows that have hung around for a long time, and either get rid of them altogether or change them so that they can be a bit more presentable to a more modern audience who likes a more announced and inclusive set of rules to work with, but still wants to use a retro clone, still wants to be able to create a character that represents themselves as they want to be, or a character that represents themselves as they could be. I know that there's a lot of people that feel that things should be binary in a game. Yes or no. And there are days when I get frustrated myself with a lot of ambiguity. My mind really likes order. It likes things to be organized. I like to be able to categorize things and have, it's like that song from The King and I. When I was but a boy, the world was a better spot. What was so, what was not was not. But when you grow up and when you enter this great world that we live in, you realize that those binary things aren't. And they never were. It was an illusion that we presented to ourselves. It was this idea that we're going to make this world conform to an ideal version where everyone knows who they are, where everyone can tell who everyone else is based on just observing, and where those things are okay. And there's no bad feeling. But that's not the world we live in. The world we live in exists in shades of gray, if you will. It exists in ambiguity. It exists in that space because the world won't make itself what we want it to be. It is our job as human beings to create the world that we want for ourselves and for our families. And the world that we want should be a world where everyone can be comfortable with who they are. And that's the great power of role-playing. That's the great power of fantasy. Because fantasy isn't reality. If you are a person who is frustrated because you don't like the ambiguity that's everywhere, you can you can play a game, I should say, in a fantasy world where that ambiguity is gone. And as long as you play with people that have the same mindset that you do, I think that that is fair. It's not the way I want to play personally, but I can respect that my view, my fun is different than your fun. And I'm not going to tell you that you're not allowed to have your fun. But where that stops is when someone tries to use their definition of fun to tell other people that they're not welcome at the table. And all too often, that has been done. And people have been told that because they want to play a character that maybe they want to play a character that's gay. Maybe they want to play a character that's bisexual. Maybe they want to play a character that, they want to be a African American style or a very dark-skinned knight of the round table. And someone tells them, well, you can't do that because they didn't exist. That attitude brought into our game repeatedly, brought into this hobby, has closed people off. You might think that, I don't judge people and I'm fine and I just talk. I say it like it is. That's a great phrase I hear, and I've unfortunately have used that in the past. Hopefully, I'm going to say it like it is right now when I'm going to tell you that that attitude is harsh and it closes people away. So it makes this hobby appear insular. It makes it look like we don't want people in our hobby that don't act exactly like we do. And when you're talking about your private game group that meets at your home, that's your home. You have the right to control who comes into your home and your private space. But when you're meeting people at a convention or at a game store or at any public space, that attitude needs to stay home, because you don't know the journey that the other people have had in order to get to that public space. You don't know the anxieties that they might have had to overcome to be able to actually express even an interest in taking part in our hobby. So go gently. All of us. We need to go gently with each other, especially when we're meeting each other for the first time. And that's why this retro clone, this Chromatic Dungeons, the author is doing their best to go gently, to create a book and a rule set which tries to welcome people into the old school Renaissance and show them that there is a space for them, that we want them here. We want everyone here, because the old school Renaissance should never have been, and in my opinion is not, about just recreating the glory days and saying, well, back in my day, this is what we did. You know what? It's about sharing a love for a simpler game system, or a love for a certain style of gaming, a very realistic in some senses style of gaming compared to the more superhero style that tends to come out of more modern editions of D20 games that you don't really get with the older edition. It gets very, very real. It gets, and not real in the sense of where, counting how many grams of food you eat in order to make sure that you're actually getting your full nutrition. Not that kind of real. I'm just talking about the understanding that I can face death. My character can face death at any moment because they're doing a dangerous job in a dangerous location, and have that mean something. And that's what old school tends to do. It also tends to do away with rules in favor of rulings from the DM. And these are all things that can be inclusive and should be inclusive, because if you want to play an OSR game and have everything be socially based and not pick up the dice in anger, in combat ever, there's room for you here to play those games. And we should be welcoming of that game style. Not everything has to be a dungeon crawl. Dungeon crawls are fun. I love dungeon crawls. It's my preferred way to play. But that doesn't have to be the only thing that we celebrate. And so, again, Chromatic Dungeons works really hard to encourage multiple types of gameplay and encourage multiple types of characters. And we as players and DMs should do better in order to encourage the people at our tables to play the kind of players and the kind of games that they want to play. And we should be honest with ourselves and with them if that's something that we're not interested in. Not in a negative way, but in just an honest statement of, you know what, if you are in a mood to run combat today and you're a DM, then tell your players, you know what, I really want to run some fights today. Just FYI, that's what I really want to do. And if a player is not in that space, then they can communicate with you and say, I really don't want to do combat today. I'm feeling very anxious about something, and I don't want to handle the stress. And then you two can come to some kind of agreement. Maybe today's the day that the players, just kind of hangs back and they play a game on their phone or something, and just stay with the group to have fun. Or maybe you give them a character that isn't their character that they can use for the combat, so they don't have to feel anxious if the character dies because it's not their character that they love. Maybe that's a solution that'll work for that player. Or maybe the solution is that you as the GM, maybe this is the day where, as much as you want to run combats, you've got to say, you know what, I'm one person. And this is about the group's enjoyment. Let's not do it. So, but anyways, I'm getting into a tangent. I'm going to try to dial it back. We're talking about Chromatic Dungeons. So, what sets this apart? Why? I've gone to broad brush strokes of what this does, but let's get into the more nitty-gritty details. So, it does have detailed charts for each of the 6 ability scores. So, if you're looking for something that's, if you like the OSR but you don't like basic D&D, like Swords and Wizardry Continual Light. If that's too light for you, if Swords and Wizardry White Box is too light for you, then this is probably going to hit closer to your sweet spot because there's more detail in this than there is in either of those 2 versions of the game, which I've talked about previously. But, okay. There's no races in this game. There are ancestries, and there's, we'll call it, there's the ancestry, and there's a heritage. Your ancestry and your heritage combine together to give a better picture of who your character is or where they came from. Excuse me. And you can mix and match. So you can decide, I want to be an elf who grew up blessed, a blessed elf. Or you could be a noble human. Noble is a heritage. You could be a pit fighter dwarf. This is all before you get to the class that your character is going to play or your character's job. This is just defining where your character came from, what they were raised as, what they were trained to be in a sense, what their influences are culturally. And there's a lot of options here. There's a lot of different things you can mess with. There's the rustic hermit, the scavenger, the arcane conduit, the exceptional size. You want to be a human of exceptional size. Maybe you want to play Andre the Giant. Go for it. You can play an Andre the Giant kind of character, the gentle giant. This system has you covered without having to look at any supplements or go to a monster manual and say, I want to find the half giant. you don't you're set to go. Or let's say you want to use this game, these rules to play, say, Dark Sun. You can create a lot of the more harsher stuff that exists in Dark Sun here. There is not an insectoid ancestry as far as I've read so far. That isn't here. But maybe you don't want that in your Dark Sun game. Maybe you said, like that's a bit weird for me. I'm not interested in walking praying mantises, so let's just leave them out. You can do that. It's your own version of Dark Sun. You can do it anything you want. Do you think you don't want cannibalistic halflings? Get rid of those and replace them with something else. But the point is, this book gives you a lot of options to create a setting as the DM, to kind of influence what kind of cultures, where they would exist, and decouple a lot of that from the race of the choices that your character makes. Instead, you can create, using both the ancestry and the heritage of your in your world, you can create multiple cultures. And you can have huge diversity between those. You can have dwarves, one group of dwarves who's the mountain-dwelling dwarves that we are all familiar with, and another group of dwarves that lives on boats on the river. It's all covered. It's all covered here. It's in the rules. That level of diversity I find fascinating. It's actually one of the most diverse things I have ever seen in the OSR, rules-wise. And I really like that encouragement to create a bunch of different things. And it's really cool. And it does it without going as far as some systems like the Cypher system go, which I'll talk about in a future video. It does it within the context of an OSR game in recognized chunks. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you pick a human as your ancestry. What are the rules? Humans get a +1 bonus to any ability score of their choice. They speak the common language and one additional language of your choice. Humans tend to stand between 5 and 7 feet in height and weigh between 125 to 300 pounds. Humans tend to live around 80 years or longer and have a base movement of 30 feet. Okay, that's a pretty bog standard. There's nothing surprising there. There's nothing that should shock anyone as far as rules go. But then let's go to the heritage section. And let's say that you decide that your human is part of an enlightenment group. Well, that means if your human is somehow enlightened, they're that you can translate that however you want. Really, this book does not tell you what enlightenment means. It just says you're part of an enlightenment group. And the result of that is that you are immune to magical and mundane fear. That's pretty cool. Okay. And that's just one option out of these. There's actually, I can't count them right now, but there's close to 20 options here, as far as I can tell, which combine the heritage options with the options provided for ancestries, including the optional ancestries, which include bugbears, bully frogs, centaurs, gnolls, goblins, hobgoblins, kobolds, lizardmen, minotaurs, and orcs. You've got a lot of options for a kind of character that you can create. A DM has a lot of options for different cultures they can throw in, and that's just in the base book. That's not in, there's more supplemental materials coming. So that's cool. Let's get into the classes. The classes are the standard ones that we're already familiar with. Clerics, druids, paladins, fighters, such, what have you, wizards, things like that. So, rogues, obviously. And there is a ranger as well. So what sets this apart from other versions? I'm going to try to find, here we go, it's the fighter. The human fighter. What ought to be the most common played character out there, because human fighters are fun. They're relatively easy to learn the game on. And realistically, human fighters were everywhere, and they often rose to places of prominence in our own history, and often in our fantasy stories as well. So, what does a human fighter do, or a fighter class in this? So, the one thing that this does, which surprised me a little bit, is they do have minimum ability score requirements for classes. That surprised me a little bit, because I kind of expected them to do away with that. It's something that I've done away with in my games. Whenever I run a game, I tend to get rid of it. So I personally would edit that out when I run a game. I just say, yeah, we're not gonna worry about ability score requirements. You want to play a paladin, play a paladin. But what I will say is, if you do want to run with that, if that's still your jam, then everything here is very reasonable. I think I was checking through earlier, and I always check the Paladin, because that's my personal I have a love-hate relationship with the Paladin class. And the highest ability score requirement for a Paladin is they want you to have a charisma of 15. But when you pick the Paladin class, you automatically get a +1 to your charisma score. So I would argue that means that you need to have a charisma of 14, which tells me that's pretty reasonable. That's not like 2nd edition, where you had to have a 17 in one score and a 15 in another and a 14 in another. And it got to the point where it was nearly impossible to roll that without some special shenanigans, or just permission from the DM to choose those as your minimum scores and keep going. So that's something that's pretty cool. And yes, every time you pick a class, because the bonuses, no one's getting any bonuses from their ancestries like that. But you pick a class, because you pick to be a fighter, you get an automatic +1 to either your strength, your dexterity, or your constitution. Strength, dexterity, or con. I kind of like this, because that reflects the fact that your character chose a field of study, chose a profession, and then get some benefit from that, because if you choose to become a fighter, then in the process of training to be a fighter, you are going to get stronger, or you're going to get faster, or you're going to toughen up. And that happens naturally as you are training. So this, in a way, this sort of reflects that, even though all it's really doing is bringing back the ability score adjustments that were usually coupled to race, and now are no longer coupled to race. We're no longer saying things like that. Instead, it's being put on your class. And I think that's really cool. I think it's a good way to do it. So let's go back to heritage again. In this case, ancestry, sorry. So let's look at the halfling. What do you get when you become a halfling? You get a +2 bonus to all saving throw rolls. Okay. You speak halfling in common. You can stand between, it tells you the height, the age, the base movement, and you get infravision. Not dark vision, infravision. So that's awesome to me, because it has decoupled the ability score modifiers from the races, like I mentioned just now. And that gives it gets rid of the impression that all halflings are, and then we talk about, they get a +1 to dexterity. All halflings are dexterous. Now, you want to be a clumsy halfling, be a clumsy halfling. You can do that. And there's nothing in the rules that are going to tell you're playing it wrong. I mean, the infravision, the low, all halflings have that. Okay, well, that's a function of the biological function of the eyes, and if you really want to play a halfling that has a disability and never got that, if you're at my table, go for it. Seriously, like I will encourage that. I'll give you an experience point bonus for taking that stuff, because when you have to live with a disability, you learn quickly how to compensate for that with other means. And I think that that's worth a bonus to experience points. I think that's well reflected. So these things are there, and there are options to make it better. Let's talk about, well, really, I mean, that's, and how the classes handle things. That's kind of the biggest stuff. There's other things that are different, but I don't want to spoil everything for you. I don't want to lay it all out. First off, that would make this video insanely long. It's already pretty long, but we're trying to be a little more comfortable, a little more chatty. So let's look a bit more at some of this gorgeous art. Now it's all, grayscale, black and white art. So just be aware of that. There's no color art in this aside from the front cover. But the art is still really good. It's very diverse. Excuse me. And I use that as reference to the style, to the subject matter, the kind of people that are being portrayed, to the monsters. Now, lest you be concerned as a DM or a player that this means that the world presented here is all, to quote a song, shiny, happy people. That's not true. That's not the way it is. I mean, we're not talking about a place where everyone just magically gets along. That's not what is presented here. That's not what's done. What's done is creating a world where you can have those characters. But if you as the DM, like, I want to create a world where I've got these nations that are constantly at each other's throats, or these noble houses that can't get along and they're backstabbing each other, and there's racism and there's horribleness and there's judgment and bad things in my world. If you want to have that world and your players want to play in that world, you can make that world with this system. It won't stop you. All it does is say in the rules that your players can and should play the people who maybe stand out within that world. Maybe they stand out because they fight against the injustice, or they stand out because they strive to overcome the limitations of the setting and be heroes. Because if we were playing in a grim or dark setting and our characters instantly are just part of the churn of that setting, and they're not able to influence that at all, and they're just trying to survive. Survival is fun for a while, but after a while you want to be able to make changes. You want to influence the world. You want to see that what your character does matters, unless you're playing Mork Borg, and that's a different system entirely with an entirely different mindset, which is fine. This isn't Mork Borg. Mork Borg is Mork Borg. This is Chromatic Dungeons, and this one, it caters more to a diverse clientele now. But you can it's better to make scenarios, make worlds where your players have something to overcome, where they have something to strive against, and where their decisions matter. And this system is created in such a way that I think it feels more welcoming to me. It feels like, and I'm not a person of color. I am a person with a disability. My disability is visible because I have albinism, and therefore everyone who looks at me knows that I'm different, knows that I am odd, and I have had to live with that my entire life. Now, I have it better than other people with albinism do, because my ancestry is European, and so I don't necessarily stand out as much. But I still stand out, and I still recognize those differences. So on that level, at least, that minor level, I can kind of get where some people have issues with how they are being portrayed in media and how people treat them based on appearances. Oh, you'll excuse me for a moment. I've got a little friend. Say hi to Missy. Say hi to my cat. She really wants to be in the video, so she was coming up and giving me scritches. I'm gonna give her scritches too. Okay, she's on the lap. So, Chromatic Dungeons is really awesome, and the reason why I wanted to talk about it today is because it has been released on drive-through for both PDF and print on demand. And I'd really like to give this guy as much of a signal boost as I can for that reason. Now, you've got the main book itself, and then there is, if you don't want to haul a big hardback around, there are the soft back, it's the basic rules, monsters and treasure, and then basic rules, kind of main rule book, player's book, basically. So if you want to just have the player's book and show that to your players or get a couple copies to pass out at the table, you're covered there if you just want to do that. The other thing that they've released and that you can get on drive-through is they have these little kind of digest-sized, they're magazines. Each one deals with a particular topic. There's introducing the Mrav Kovjeka. I'm not sure what that is. I haven't read it yet, but it looks kind of cool. It looks like a monster. So that could be really neat to create some scenarios. We have the Animist Class, an entirely new class of an Animist who basically it looks like they take on the features of monsters in order to help fight monsters. Then there's another one. This looks like it has to do with the octopuses. I can't quite pronounce that word. I'm not going to try. Octopi. So, the Ashropod monsters. Then there's the Psionist class. There's another class to kind of expand your game a little bit if you want. And then number 5, we have the Ecology of the Orc. This is the one that they spent a little bit of time on, so I'm going to talk about it a little bit. The Ecology of the Orc, what it does is it talks about orcs as a species or as a ancestry, and it talks about the different cultures of orcs, how you can combine them, and you can combine the ancestry and the heritage to create a unique orc tribe or clan or society. And it gives several examples. I'm not going to list them off because I actually do want you to buy these and read it, or engage with the author and talk about what he wants to do. What I will say is the Knoll Sage is what these are called. These books all have large-sized print. The print's large-sized and easy to read. Everything is clearly laid out. There's no images behind the text. The tables are well established. Here's a look at the book about the orcs. See, it's all clearly laid out. A screen reader should have no trouble with this PDF, I should imagine, because there's no shenanigans. There's no craziness. You just got to read text. And that's something that holds true with the main rulebook as well. Let's show another page of the main rulebook. This is part of what I talked to the author about when it was part of the Kickstarter, because the original versions of this had this parchment background behind the words that gave it this really cool look. Artistically, it was awesome, but as someone with a visual impairment, I couldn't read it. I just couldn't, and I had to tell that to the author. I knew that if I didn't say something, I would feel like I wasn't being a responsible backer of the Kickstarter, but I also felt like if there was a chance that I could get a text-only version of the book somehow, then it would be more useful to me and to the people that I sometimes play with. Well, a few other people joined in that conversation and talked about their own difficulties and how visual impairments for them also affect their ability to read text that has images behind it. And the author, to their credit, they listened. And they listened pretty quickly too. At first, I got the impression they were a little hesitant. I think that they had a lot of love. I mean, no one does something like that without really wanting to do it, without having a desire to do it. And I really respect the author, because they not only did they go through the effort to remove that background from the PDFs, which they talked about doing, but then they went back and they removed it from the documents that they were sending to the printer as well. So now we have this beautiful, crisp book with no background images behind any of the text. There's some grayscale in the charts, but it's not the kind that disrupts the ability to read. So, and the text itself is pretty large size. And part of that is because this is a full-sized hardback. This is not a digest-sized book. I usually get digest-sized books, and if this was digest-sized, I'd have a hard time reading it. But because it's a full-sized book, this print size is great. It's comfortable for me to read. I don't know what point font it is. I can't tell you that. But I can tell you that for me, as with a visual impairment, who needs reading glasses, and my prescription's pretty substantial, but I can sit down and I can read this comfortably. If you normally read stuff with a screen reader or a heavy magnifier on Zoom, so on a Zoom setting, not the Zoom, the video call, you should be fine. Get the PDF, and you can zoom in all you want. You can put it on your phone, you can put it on your tablet, and you're covered there. But if your visual impairment is minor, then this book is still going to be great for you. There's no disruption of the text. This is a great example of the gray panel. It's very readable. It is gray behind there, but I don't have an issue with reading it. I concentrate slightly more, and I'm good to go. So, as far as accessibility for the visually impaired, this is one of the better ones. I actually think that this book is more accessible to someone with a visual impairment than the 5th edition D&D Player's Handbook. I'll say that again. Chromatic Dungeons, as a book, as a physical product, is more accessible for someone with a visual impairment to read than the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Player's Handbook. Wizards of the Coast, if you ever hear anything I have to say, for whatever reason, with your next edition, please go gently with your art and layouts so that we can have clear text to read for those of us with disabilities, especially when you do the first pages of new chapters. You make beautiful books, but there are sections that are very difficult to read, and this has been true since 3rd edition. Go gently, please. And this goes to any other creators who really have this idea that they want to do. Unless your creation requires that image or that layout style to function, like Mork Borg does. It really makes use of that, and I've commented that on the review that I did for that system, on the recommendation for it. Unless it's required, clear text, clear, bold even text on a white page with nothing behind it is so much easier for everybody. Please, I know it looks boring. I know you want your book to stand out, but this is how you retain a large swathe of visually impaired people who are your customers. Okay, that's enough of that. I wholeheartedly, without reservation, recommend this system, not only to people who want a game that sees them, who want a game that is more, the rulebook is more welcoming, but also to people who just want a they want a different take on the OSR. They want a fresher look. This book has got that. It's fun, it's interesting. I didn't go into detail on all the rules because I haven't finished reading everything yet, and I don't want to mislead anyone. But it is one of the books that I'm enjoying reading, and I hope in the future, once I finish with the Prince Valiant series, I might pick up Knave next to go in more detail on Knave, but I might not. I might actually just skip right to this one in order to do a character creation with this game, and then 1 or 2 sessions of a live solo play to kind of show you how the game works. We'll see what the future brings. If you enjoyed this long ramble of a video, if you found this information helpful, please leave me a like, a comment, maybe even a subscription. I'd appreciate it. You don't have to. You're busy. I understand. I'm not going to pound on your door and say, you didn't subscribe and I'm angry. No, I'm not like that. But it would let me know what people like to see. If you would rather I do shorter, more concise videos where I just present some quick bullet points of why I recommend something and then get out of town in less than 20 minutes, probably less than 12 minutes, let me know. Leave me a comment. Leave me if you I'm going to share this on Facebook. Those of you who see it, leave me a comment on Facebook. Let me know. I'm not offended. I'm just trying to test out different things to see what people like, and that's all. I hope you have a marvelous day. Thank you for stopping by. Peace be with all of you. Bye-bye.